Welcome to A-Push. Today we're going to be looking at the rest of the presidency of Thomas Jefferson and trying to explore the different ways in which he sometimes remade the country in his own image and sometimes kept us on the path that we've been going previously. So let's talk about Jeffersonian democracy. Here are your basic objectives, so take a moment and pause. And let's see the level to which Jefferson stayed consistent to his beliefs now that he's in power. So, for financial policy, we already looked yesterday at how he scaled back the role of the federal government pretty substantially. Obviously, he had argued very strongly against a national bank when he was Secretary of State, and of course campaigned against the national bank. But once he became president, he appointed Albert Gallatin as Secretary of the Treasury, and Gallatin is going to keep the national bank and continue operating it similarly to how it had been operating during the Federalist administrations. So he was able to pay down significantly the national debt and reduce the size of the Army and the Navy, but he kept the bank intact because he saw that it was an absolute necessity to continue to keep the country functioning economically. And so bank stays intact under Jefferson, despite some of his previous promises. He does attack the federal judiciary by first repealing the Judiciary Act and trying to attack a lot of Adams's new Federalist appointments. He is able to remove and impeach some judges. For example, John Pickering had a tendency, he was a judge in New Hampshire, had a tendency to get drunk and then give ridiculous rulings from the bench. And so he was impeached for violation of for drunkenness and profanity and unlawful rulings. But when Jefferson attacked the Supreme Court, he tried to get Samuel Chase kicked off the court, and the impeachment failed. So the Supreme Court stayed intact, and Federalists kept control of the federal courts, but Jefferson was able to remove some lower courts. The most important Supreme Court ruling at this time was Marbury versus Madison. This is a ruling that was about one of Adams' midnight justices who didn't get his commission soon enough before Jefferson took over, and so he sued the federal government to try to get his judgeship, which James Madison, who was the current Secretary of State, refused to give him. So here's Marbury and Madison. In the end, the Supreme Court Justice John Marshall, who's an important Federalist, you should write down John Marshall, ruled that Madison did not have to give Marbury his job because the Judiciary Act was unconstitutional. So this is important because it enshrined in law the idea of judicial review. Judicial review is the idea that the Supreme Court can declare laws constitutional or unconstitutional, and it's another way to sort of deal with the issue of what happens if Congress passes unconstitutional laws. Jefferson and Madison had previously articulated the doctrine of nullification, but we already talked about how that's kind of a problem because what's to stop any state from nullifying any law that they don't like? So that doesn't necessarily work. So this establishes the idea that it is the Supreme Court's job to declare laws unconstitutional. Hamilton had previously written about this in the Federalist Papers, but this ruling enshrined it in American legal tradition. And when you think about the Supreme Court today, their main goal is to rule on the constitutionality of laws, which is not actually something that was in the Constitution itself, which, again, interesting. So, Marbury versus Madison, judicial review. Jefferson also fought the First Barbary War, which was kind of an unfortunate one for the United States since he had cut significantly the budget of the Navy. As you hopefully remember, the pirates along the coast of northern Africa were still attacking American ships, and so we dispatched a task force to go and teach those pirates a lesson. So the USS Philadelphia squared off against some Barbary pirates when we learned that the pirates are actually really good at piracy, and the Philadelphia itself fell into the hands of the enemy. Fortunately, our brave soldiers were able to get on our ship and blow it up to prevent it from being fully captured by the enemy. But the frigate itself was destroyed, and so now we're down one of our 6 frigates. We later bombarded the city of Tripoli with some other ships and later attacked another pirate town and then declared victory. But the Philadelphia was lost, and the Barbary War was, although we claimed victory, it's kind of a dubious sort of conclusion to draw. But the battle at Derna is noteworthy because it's the first time Americans fought on foreign soil. assuming that the revolution doesn't count. So here's the storming of Derna, American Marines fighting on foreign soil and winning a battle against a minor pirate city. So go United States. We also started to organize more of the Northwest Territory. You hopefully remember that the Articles of Confederation allowed the Northwest Territory to be organized, and the Native Americans had some issues with that, and so the Treaty of Greenville opened up some territory. But Jefferson is going to subdivide significantly more of the Northwest Territory into what looks like some of the boundaries of states that we have today. And you'll notice he's subdividing stuff outside the Greenville Treaty line. So I wonder how this whole thing is going to go down. Harrison Land Act empowered William Henry Harrison, who was a Virginia planter, making him governor of, quote, Indian Territory, and gave him the authority to negotiate with specific tribes in order to turn over land. And this was a process that was fraught with corruption, as they basically tried to find any Native American that they could bribe to sign away land, and then inform all Native Americans living on that land that it was time for them to go. So we start subdividing the land in this area here. As you notice, significantly outside the Greenville Treaty line here. And the response is, of course, going to be predictable. And of course, we'll talk about that tomorrow. But obviously, Native Americans are going to be less than thrilled by this. And we're going to see a new group of younger chiefs rise up to try to unite the Native Americans in the Ohio River Valley to push back against further encroachment. We also start organizing the, quote, Southwest Territory right in here. So your Northwest Territory is up here. And your Southwest Territory is this western part of Georgia into the Mississippi Territory, which if these two states look familiar, hopefully these two states look familiar. And so we start settling this land, signing treaties with Native Americans, and moving settlers into these territories. This is also the beginning of westward speculation, which speculation is the buying and selling of Western land, or the buying of Western land and then selling it for a profit. And then that creates more demand, and then it's sold for more of a profit, and the price gets overly inflated based on rapid buying and selling. This is going to happen repeatedly throughout American history, but the Yazoo land fraud is the first example. So this actually happened under Washington's administration, but it provides a good example of what happened in a lot of cases with this Western land. Bribes were given to congressmen in order to sell the land on pennies on a dollar. Then a bunch of lies were spun about how the land was wonderful and there were no Native Americans on it at all. And then they sold it to new investors, who then spun more lies about how fertile it was. And there's probably gold there. You should pay even more. And so they kept bidding up the price until eventually someone went out there and it turns out it's a swamp. And then the price crashes and it leads to an economic panic. In this case, no one was actually charged. The legislators were just voted out of office, but it did lead to an economic downturn in the late 1790s, and this is going to happen repeatedly. So let's lay out. So let's hit these objectives. Make sure you can explain the goals of the Jefferson administration and Marbury versus Madison, and the degree to which Jefferson held to his strict construction once he was in office. When we come back, we're going to deal with westward expansion and the Louisiana Purchase. And so we're going to come back to this last question here tomorrow. So if you can't, answer this for now, and then we'll reevaluate where we are after tomorrow's lesson.